So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Again, I want to let everybody know this meeting is being recorded, and also be mindful to mute your computer or phone if you do not want us to hear you. So my name is Lauren Olson. I work for the City of Minneapolis in the Intergovernmental Relations Department. And I've been asked to just kind of help facilitate this meeting. And I've also been working with folks to coordinate the logistics around the meeting. So happy to, hopefully this will be a very useful meeting for you and nice and smooth. So also my colleague Allison is going to be helping me out to kind of keep an eye on the chat. If you do have any questions as we go, like about something logistical or technical, you can, raise your hand. You can put something in the chat. I think Allison's also willing to assist people if you want to give her a call. So I think she'll put her phone number in the chat so that that's an option as well. I think some of you are familiar with this meeting from the past, or that what the basic purpose is tonight. But the focus of this meeting is on rail safety issues during light rail construction in this corridor. So it's a narrow focus, and this meeting is the result of an act of the legislature. And I think we have a couple of the authors with us tonight, Representative Hornstein and Senator Dibble. Thank you for that. So this meeting has some specific boundaries and suggestions about what we want to accomplish. So we hope to stay true to that and deliver on that. And we also worked with the neighborhood associations. And so I want to thank the Cedar Isles Neighborhood Association, Bidet, McCoska, and Kenwood for giving us some insights into the concerns that residents have that we want to make sure to address tonight. So I also thank Chairs Brown and Cedarburg and Campbell for their help. So just want to, I think as all of the electeds and appointeds have been joining the meeting, we've acknowledged a lot of them as they came in. There's quite a few, so I thank you all for being here. I do see Councilmember Goodman, and I want to acknowledge her. Is very involved in this corridor, so welcome. Again, for those of you who didn't see everyone coming in the room, we have Met Councilmember Lilligren, Commissioner Green from Hennepin County, Councilmember Palmisano is here, Chair Zelli from the Met Council. Again, Scott and Frank from the legislature. Thank you guys for being here and all you do. I'm probably missing someone, and I don't know if Allison wants to add anything to my list, but just thank you all for being here. And if I forgot somebody, I can acknowledge that those folks later. So I think we can kind of dive in. Again, if you have a question as you go, you can put something in the chat or raise your hand. If you're not that familiar with Teams yet, at the top of the page is where you'll find all those functions, the raise hand function, this little image, or the circle for the chat. Are there any questions just logistically before we jump in? All right. All right, so what we're going to cover tonight then is the agenda is posted in the chat. So we have 4 presentations for you. We're committed to doing those presentations all before 7 o'clock so that we are leaving plenty of time for any questions that you may have. We've got great presentations that I think are really responsive to the questions we've been hearing, some of the more recent concerns that have come up, and you're also going to get to meet some new folks, including our new fire chief. So I'm excited for those of you who have not established a relationship with the fire chief. So I think we'll dive right in. And our first presentation then is going to come from the SWLRT Project office. And Jim Alexander is going to give that presentation.
All right. Hi, Lauren, and thanks. This is Jim Alexander. I'm the project director for the Southwest LRT project with Met Council. And so David Davies will help me run through the PowerPoint here. And so if you could advance the slide there, David. So this is just our intro slide to show the alignment. Of course, we'll be focusing on the Minneapolis area and essentially from primarily from Westlake all the way up to up close to the Royalston Avenue Farmers Market, where we get out of the rail corridor in the Minneapolis area. So next slide, please, David. So we have a couple of images of just work that has been progressing on the freight rail. This is an image of crews upgrading the freight rail tracks near Westlake Street Station. I do have a map that shows the progress of the work so far in the Kenworth corridor. Next slide, please. And just to show you maybe back up a second, just back to slide 4 real quick. So this is an image showing the new freight track versus what it formerly looked like in the old ties. So next slide, David. So on this slide, we had something similar last year where we showed the progress. What you see in green are the areas where we had freight rail track improvements completed. In the kind of the brownish area, that gold area, that's essentially where the tunnel is in the narrow corridor, where we've kind of scooted the freight rail tracks to the west a bit for the tunnel excavation, and then we'll eventually bring those tracks back to their original location. And so there's still work to be done there as soon as once the tunnel gets completed. And the areas in yellow are still areas that need to be worked on in terms of freight rail tie replacement that are anticipated to be completed in 2022. So next slide, David. So we continue to have questions about the freight rail monitoring and the maintenance. This is a component that we look at very seriously in terms of making sure that the freight tracks are in good operating order as we're doing our construction. We coordinate our work with TC&W, the short line that Mark Wagner's going to be talking later on, that runs his trains through here. Want to make sure things are safe as we are constructing the project. So the freight rail track conditions are monitored multiple times per workday, and these conform to specifications we put in into the contract, which were reviewed by TC&W before we put those into the specs. And I just point out that they are more conservative than what ordinarily FRA would require out there, just because we're in a construction site and we want to make sure that the tracks are being maintained as we do our work. So if a track is inspected and found to be out of compliance, that we stop the work, and we also communicate that with the TC&W flaggers who are on site. And so we don't allow any trains to come through until that issue is remedied. And so until that's remedied and the flagger is satisfied, we will not run trains through that area or get back to work if we have some issues. And then the rail maintenance activities are really an ongoing process. We have that, as I say, it's a daily occurrence where we're inspecting these the tracks on an ongoing basis. So next slide, please, David. So there were a number of questions that were asking about lines of communication. So we made an attempt to show how things happen in the field, and I think the city folks might have some comments about how they deal ordinarily with an emergency response. But this is an attempt from the construction side of things, where we have people on site, both council people and the contractors people out there. And so if there's something observed that has happened out there, whether it's a contractor or a council staff, that information is relayed to the contractor site superintendent. That's first and foremost, and that information flows to the TC&W flagger. And frankly, in the Kenworth corridor, where the work is, there we have flaggers on both ends of the tunnel right now, and that information gets relayed rather quickly. And so that'll go up to the TC&W dispatch. There's also a TC&W project manager who is on board for the project that works for Mark Wagner, and they are informed. So the TC&W flagger gets the dispatch alerted, so we don't have any trains come through if there's an issue with the tracks. Similarly, on our side, we have our car. This is the council's authorized representative, Andy Collum. In this case, he has a direct connection to the City of Minneapolis Department of Public Works. Typically, that's Rick Kreuzer. There's always backup to these folks if they have time off for that particular day, and information is also sent up the leadership chain, if you will. And after our safety folks, our outreach, David Davies is in the loop on things, and he will be the prime communicator. As you've seen in the past, he'll get information out to the community if some issues come above. And then kind of going back to the Public Works, that information is disseminated from Public Works off to the city traffic, police, fire, water, depending on what the issue is. We also put up here, this is just emergency services. So if there were a serious injury or there was something going on with property that was serious, a 911 call would be made. And just know that all the construction workers, including the council staff that are on there and our consultants, are trained to handle a situation of calling 911 if there is a emergency situation. And I think I just neglected to mention the contractor's site super will also contact his management to let him know what's going on, and they have a freight rail coordinator who is contacted as well. So that's kind of in general for a construction related issue, particularly as it revolves around maybe a track shifting or something like that. That's how the communication line runs. So next slide there, David. So just construction safety and just in general, just know that all the construction staff, before they can get on site, they have to go through some safety training. And typically, once you've done that, there's a sticker that gets put on a hard hat that the construction staff have on their body as they're on the site. So that goes for council staff as well, and their consultants or our consultants. And so it covers federal and MnOSHA, Federal Railroad Administration policies, and just to know that both these agencies are keeping an eye on us. They aren't necessarily right in front and center, but we know they're keeping an eye on how things are going. FRA is always interested in any construction that's related to freight rail corridors. And as I indicated, all construction personnel undergo job site safety, and that safety training does include that how to address 911 situations. So next slide, I think that might be it for my slides. So wanted to kind of keep the presentation short, and so we don't take a long time with PowerPoints, because I know that kind of annoyance for some folks, but I'll be happy, Lauren, to take question and answers after the other presenters. Is that how we're going to maybe work that, or?
Yes, that's correct. Just want to be clear with folks that we are going to hold all of the questions till the end. I know it can be a little challenging. I see some people already posting some in the chat. I just want you to know we won't be able to get to those because we're all focused on what we're doing until we get to the Q&A period. At that point, we can kind of go back to some of that and then ask you to articulate some of your questions also. So, yeah, so thank you, Jim. And we will then move on to our next presenter. Mark Wagner is here with us. He's the president and CEO of Twin Cities and Western Railroad Company. Mark joined us last year, and we really appreciated his insights and his willingness to participate in this meeting and talk to us about railroad protocols. So I can turn over to you, Mark.
Very good. I want to thank everybody for being on as well. We take safety very seriously. And so for those of you that are new in this call, I thought I'd give you some little background. Number one, we do not haul any crude oil. Never have called crude oil, and there's no intentions of hauling crude oil anytime in the future. So that's one question that gets asked often. But we do haul unit ethanol trains. We do about 6 a month on average. There's 2 ethanol plants we serve, and the ethanol is primarily brought out to the East Coast of the United States to blend to make environmentally safe blends of gas. But there are strict protocols with ethanol. Each plant has to rigorously inspect each car after it's loaded to make sure all of the safety appliances are applied. And they do get inspected routinely by the FRA's Office of Hazardous Materials. And they're not bashful at all about pointing out things, such things as simple as one loose nut on a rail car. They'll find that. And so not only that, but then they also will inspect our train handling of these hazardous trains. We take it very seriously. We go through the corridor at 10 miles an hour. Each locomotive has got a foot measurement. They know how long the train is. So as they're leaving the corridor going east, they start the counter at the junction of the BNSF on the northeast end of the corridor towards downtown, and they'll watch that monitor until they know the entire train has traversed through the corridor. Then they can increase the speed up to 25 miles an hour. We do 25 miles an hour on our own track, and then of course 10 miles an hour through this corridor. The other hazmat we haul, which is typically in single cars, is liquefied propane. We bring that in westbound, and it goes out to western Minnesota, where there's a distributor out in Montevideo. And I'm guesstimating it might be maybe 20 cars a month, somewhere in there, depending on the season. They typically stock up a little bit more in the fall. But again, we're going 10 miles an hour through the corridor. Those trains are inspected in St. Paul before we pick them up, so we know they're safe to handle. But the other tank cars you see have what would be more benign things like animal tallows or corn oil or things like that. So not every tank car that you see is a hazardous material, but I do know it's a very sensitive topic with the neighborhood, and so I wanted to explain all of that, the safety that goes around that, because we pay liability insurance. We don't want it to go up, so we are exceedingly cautious when we're hauling these hazardous materials. And all of our train crews, safety is our number one goal. I'm proud to say that our company has gone now over 400 days without a reportable injury, which is phenomenal. It really shows you the commitment of our people to operate safely. We also have participated and continue to participate in tabletop drills with the various hazardous response teams. We continue to do that. We did one in St. Paul with Union Pacific, BNSF, et cetera. And then we did another one in Western Hennepin County with Union Pacific and Canadian Pacific, so that we're all trained should something happen. In 2021, there's a Short Line Safety Institute out of Washington, D.C., and they have a special hazardous materials training train. We've been trying to get that train out to our property, invite all the fire departments out so they can see and feel the rail cars themselves. And I'm happy to say that we're scheduled to get it in 2021. Hopefully early summer is what we're thinking. And we will be inviting all the fire departments out so they can have the hands-on rail car, training. So we're doing everything we can in the rare instant that something might happen. But our number one goal is to make sure nothing happens. But be prepared. Some things that are occurring this fall and going into next winter into the spring, you may notice there's a few extra trains going through. And the reason what they are is they are loaded corn trains. Because of the drought in Canada this past year, a feedlot market has opened up in Alberta and in Saskatchewan and in Manitoba. And so we are now taking empty 100-car trains from Canadian Pacific, loading them with corn and running them back through. That's adding, I'm guessing at this time, forecasting demand is very, very difficult. I'm guessing it's adding maybe 8 trains a week, 4 empties going in and 4 loads going back out. So if you notice an uptick in train activity, that's what that is. Jim alluded to the safety protocols within the corridor. We do have weekly construction meetings with the Met Council and the contractors out there. And he alluded to TC&W hired for the duration of the project an independent engineer who has got an eagle eye for spotting defects, and he's not bashful about pointing those defects out when they happen. And so Met Council and the contractors have been very responsive. You know, some of these defects are very, very minimal, but very, very minimal defects, if not addressed, lead to bigger defects. And he's been very good at catching them before they become an issue. And so we get the minutes of these construction meetings, and then he relays them on to me and adds his editorial comments on it. So I feel very connected with how this construction is going, especially with relative to safe freight rail operations. I did have an on-site visit a week ago Tuesday, where I rode with our person basically from Hopkins all the way into where the tunnel is and out to Bryn Mawr, so I could see hands-on firsthand all of the things and the issues that I read about. And so I'm very proud of the flaggers that we have. In addition, their performance, in addition to protecting all of the construction contractors from train movements and train movements from construction equipment, that's their primary goal. But I'm also proud to say that each and every one of them is trained in track inspecting. So in addition to the inspections that Jim alluded to on the Met Council side and the contractor side, we have 7 flaggers who are all trained in track inspection. So if they notice things, you know, that's just that many more eyes on the ground. Let's see. The Federal Railroad Administration is our safety government regulator. And so they do unannounced visits where they'll basically sit in their vehicle and they'll monitor our radio communications. They'll check each flagger's check-in list for contractors entering the site, leaving the site, checking the daily job briefings, all of that documentation. And the last random inspection we had was a week ago Monday, and they reported no issues to report, which is phenomenal, because we ultimately, the FRA is the safety auditor of freight rail operating practices. And so to get no exceptions noted is probably the best we can do. And so we're grateful for that. That means our people are trained and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that is basically what I had to say. I wanted to give you what we do, what the current situation is, and the robust safety protocols we have. And so thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mark. We appreciate that. And as folks, as you think of your questions too, I just want to remind you that we're going to focus on questions that do pertain to rail safety. I know that there are other issues coming up around construction impacts and other things, but we're going to have these great experts in the room, so we're going to really try to make sure we stay focused. And then I just wanted to also make note, there's a link in the chat to the Southwest Light Rail public involvement page. And some of the questions that we were hearing from the community in advance of this meeting, the city and a lot of the answers came from the Southwest Project Office, and their partners have responded to a lot of questions that have come up. So that's an additional resource that you can look at now or in the future. So go ahead and check out that link in the chat for those questions. So we're going to go ahead then and move on to our next speaker. Some of you who were here last year will remember that it was essentially Chief Friedel's last day on the job, and he really wanted to be here for this. So I'm glad for those of you who have not yet met our new fire chief, Brian Tyner. Pleased to give you the opportunity to get to know him. We've been lucky to have another great fire chief. So I'm going to turn that over to him.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Brian Tyner, and I am the newest Minneapolis fire chief, the current Minneapolis fire chief. I'm just about a week shy of finishing up my first year in this role. I've been with the Minneapolis Fire Department for almost 27 years now, and so I've held just about every rank, from firefighter all the way up to now to chief. And so very happy to be here with you today. I hope you're having a great holiday season. And without any further ado, I will launch into my presentation, if I can figure out how to share it with you. Are you seeing this? Are you seeing my slides?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we are.
Thank you. So I thought just to ground us, I would start with the the motto of the Minneapolis Fire Department, or with our mission statement rather. And it says employees of the Minneapolis Fire Department are thoroughly trained to protect lives, property, and the environment by rapidly responding to emergencies and hazardous situations. The MFD is committed to prevention by working with the community to reduce risk to life, property, and the environment. And part of that is what we're trying to do tonight. I thought I'd start out by talking about our response capabilities in the case of an emergency such as a rail emergency. The MFD employs a hazardous materials team 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. That team is led by Ladder 9 and Engine 11, and they're located at Fire Station 11 over in the southeast area of the city. Last year, we upgraded our area raid monitoring equipment. I think Chief Rito told you about that at the time. Area raid monitoring equipment allows us to monitor hazardous conditions downrange. And this year, we upgraded our portable monitoring equipment, which is the equipment that we use to monitor right where we're at. It's the ones that the firefighters are going to have in their hand. I also wanted to let you know that we are absolutely willing to host a meet and greet with our hazmat team at our training facility so you can see how we train and some of the props that we have to train on if there is an interest. I also wanted to let you know that the MFD also maintains mutual aid agreements with other fire departments along the rail corridor, as well as the railroad itself, to maximize our response capabilities. We do a lot of training on the Minneapolis Fire Department. It's, these type of incidents are very low frequency, high risk incidents is what we call them. And so in order to be ready for them, we do a lot of training in advance of anything ever happening. The MFD conducts training daily for all manner of hazards to include hazardous materials emergencies, and more specifically, the mitigation of hazardous materials emergencies associated with train derailments. The MFD also conducts tabletop exercises as well as live exercises in partnership with the rail industry every year. Now I want to move on to what the expectation should be in the case of an incident and how we respond. Our hazardous materials team will respond in addition to other MFD resources. The incident commander on scene will take command and decide, based upon how the incident presents, our mitigation strategy and if additional support is required. I could have said that better. They're going to decide based upon how the incident presents our strategy and if additional support is required, and also if an evacuation is required, or if it might be more appropriate to shelter in place. The factors that we consider for that are constantly monitored to keep up with changes to the incident. Communication will occur as to whether we are asking residents to shelter in place or evacuate, along with information and instructions as to how large the evacuation zone is, what direction to evacuate, and all the information you're going to need to keep yourself safe. Some of the factors that go into those evacuation decisions are the specific hazard. Is it a fire? Is it a spill? Does the spill involve a hazardous material? Is it one product or is it multiple products? Our decisions will always be based upon the greatest hazard, whatever that is. And we use our emergency response guide, and we also have some software that helps us determine, based upon all the factors, what the how large the evacuation zone will need to be, and also what direction is the best way to go. Weather is a big determinant, especially the wind direction. If we have a product that's lighter than air and it's flowing through the air, such as a smoke plume, the wind direction is going to determine if an evacuation is necessary and in what direction. We always try to evacuate upwind and uphill. And so that's why topography also comes into play. I think communication is probably the most important thing that can happen in an incident like this. And so we will communicate to residents by leveraging all methods of communication available to us, to include, but not limited to, messaging pushed out to cell phones and electronic devices using the iPod system. This is something that is relatively new for us, or a new capability for us, I should say. If you can recall, we used it during the civil unrest to let people know that there was going to be curfews in place, and to also remind them when the curfew was getting close and when the curfew was actually in place. We will also use social media to include our MFD Twitter page and also the City of Minneapolis's various social media pages to help get that information out. We'll also use traditional media like radio and television to get the messaging out. And finally, the good old standby, we're going to go door to door notification using firefighters and law enforcement officers on the scene to get you the information that you need. So, I feel my voice going, but before it does, I was going to ask you if you have any questions, but I guess we're going to wait till the end. So please save those questions for the end, and I will be happy to answer whatever you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Yes, that can be an invitation for you to think about your questions. And by the way, for questions that we don't get to tonight, we can still route those to the correct people, or which are not focused on tonight's topic. We can still help get those directed to folks for you. All right, so thank you. So I am happy to be able to introduce you to another person who might be a new face for you, but maybe somebody you'll see around more in the future as well. Angela Anthony is the Communications and Outreach Branch Director with the Minneapolis Office of Emergency Management, and she has some information to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Could I get a mic check? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I will share my screen here. There we are. Hi. I am Angela Antoni. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm here this evening representing the city's Office of Emergency Management. I'm here to touch briefly on the role of the Office of Emergency Management as it relates to this conversation. We're a city department of 9 people, and one of our roles is to support the incident commander during large or complex incident responses. So going back to Chief Tyner's slides when he talked about how the incident commander on scene of an emergency would quickly assess the situation and then decide which direction they wanted to drive the response. One of our roles is to support that incident commander. The good news is first responders like police, fire, and EMS are well equipped and can respond to most incidents as routine. So most incidents don't require our participation. We do have a role where an incident is larger, more complex than what the incident commander has the immediate resources for. So a rail incident, the incident commander in the field would be the authority to determine whether residents and visitors would need to evacuate or shelter in place. And we would be called in to help manage information, resources, and consequences. If there were a complex incident, we may activate our Emergency Operations Center, the EOC. And this could be a physical place or a virtual place where management and coordination come together to support the incident commander in the field. The EOC is where we, the Office of Emergency Management, along with partners we pull in, would manage information, manage resources, and the consequences of the response operation. We are the group between the strategic leaders and the tactical responders. So we're the group that tell people who's in charge, what's happening, if things are getting better or worse. We communicate what we're doing and what still needs to be done. In coordination with other city departments, the Office of Emergency Management provides a sense of order before order is restored. So this picture here on my slide is one picture of what a physical emergency operations center might look like. So the question I can bring tonight too is what can you do? What is something that residents can do to prepare? And truly the best thing residents along the corridor, and indeed all city residents, can do is to have a personal household plan about where they could evacuate to safely and how they might shelter in place for 72 hours or more. Residents may want to consider multiple evacuation routes in case some are inaccessible. And if you had to leave home quickly, could you do so in under 10 minutes? And where are the options for places where you could go and comfortably stay? As you build your personal home preparedness plan and kit, be sure to consider these questions broadly and think about multiple options because there isn't a standard incident. They all behave differently and require different responses. A plan that is focused on a specific type of incident might not be useful for another type. For instance, if you only plan for a rail incident, it won't necessarily be helpful if there's a tornado event. In emergency management, we call this an all hazards plan. Plan for where you'd go if you had to leave and how you'd manage if you had to stay, regardless of the kind of incident that occurs. Ready.gov is a fantastic place to go for more information, ideas, templates, things you can print, kind of questions to prompt as you build your personal household preparedness kit and plan. And I'm, of course, happy to stay on the line and be available for questions. My director, Barrett Lane, is also in attendance. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Angela. Yeah, I wanted to acknowledge Director Lane since I had not done that yet, so thank you for doing that. And since we did our first kind of round of acknowledging folks, I wanted to acknowledge that Chair Cedarberg from SIDNA joined us quite a while ago. Unfortunately, we had to schedule this when she was on an airplane, so thank you for going the extra mile to join us as soon as you were able. We appreciate that. So,
thanks, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you. So we're ready to move on to the Q&A. I want to give everybody on the phone a heads up that I'm going to turn to you in just a minute to see if you have questions. I am going to give the first question to, I think it was Mark. Mark, did you maybe want to articulate your question for the group?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity to ask the question. My question is, what specific safety standard is applicable and in use related to this project? And I did hear about some independent auditing that is done of the project from a safety standpoint, but I'm wondering if there is also a formalized process to look at compliance with a specific safety standard that applies to this project.
Maybe I could take a first attempt at that. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to be able to fully answer this, but I'll tell you what we do. We work with the Federal Transit Administration on this project. They're being a primary funder along with the county on this project, and so we report to them on a regular basis any safety issues that come up on the project, and that's really on a monthly process. But OSHA is also involved. Say from a construction perspective, like Mark was saying, from the railroad perspective, it's FRA. On a construction job, normally it's OSHA that we have to make sure we follow OSHA standards. And so it's really a combination case where, in this case, since we have freight rail and construction together, it's OSHA and FRA that are involved in that process. Mark, I don't know if you have anything to add.
As you're probably aware, there are specific system safety standards that apply to different types of projects. And that's the nature of my question. What specific safety standard are you using to plan, organize, direct, and control the project so that hopefully nothing gets missed in the process and that it is auditable in the sense of having a documented process that covers specific items?
Sure. Maybe I could have Dale Even is the contractor's project manager. And I think Dale is out in the field on the west side of the project right now. But I wonder, Dale, if you could talk about the processes you follow with your tool talks and how you work with your subcontractors.
Yeah, Jim. So I'm not a
100% sure on the question. If we're talking about construction safety, are we talking about the safety of the rail corridor in its final configuration? I'm not sure what the question is.
The question is related to the entire project itself, and that would include rail safety, construction safety, potential environmental impacts, and other issues related to this project. Not only the individuals working on the project, but also the neighbors, the people that are living nearby.
Yeah. So I think Jim touched on OSHA, which 1926 OSHA is where you'll find a lot of our
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a specific safety standard. You're probably familiar with OSHA's 1805 or the ISO standards that apply to system safety. That's what I'm talking about. No one seems to be able to address that.
Right, but I think that list, because you threw in environmental and safety from the construction standpoint and the operations, that the list is going to be quite extensive. You start thinking about the DNR.
Well, that's the whole point, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, we're right, and I guess where do you want to start? If you want a recital of every code that we have to abide by?
No. What I am saying is there is a standard that applies, and I'm wondering which one you're using. I'm not talking about the OSHA code book, 1926. I'm talking about a system safety standard that is recognized by professional
I'm sorry,
societies.
I still don't understand the question.
Well, maybe I could. Maybe I'm kind of
Right.
a little more understanding what you're asking about. It might be related to our design criteria that we have in place before we actually even get into construction. And that's based on industry standards. It's based on what we've understood and learned from other projects, other LRT projects we've worked on, such as the Blue Line and the Green Line. So that's an evolving document as we work on these projects. And from that, I don't know if this is going to fully answer your question, but in terms of we go through a safety certification process. So we have a number of items. It's hundreds of items long that need to be checked off on this project before we get into revenue service. And so that is something that we have run through that with our Metro Transit safety director, to make sure that we're covering all the elements that need to be covered under that umbrella, if you will.
Yeah, I'd like to see what the citation is of that. In other words, specifically, where can you find that? What's the title, the number, the date in which it was last revised? Those kinds of things that would give, I think, a lot of people on the call and off the call some additional assurance. I don't doubt that you people are doing a great job. I don't doubt that you are diligent about your work. But I like to have the issue of, as someone mentioned earlier, the remote event that has high consequences, and whether or not there is a system safety approach, a failure modes and effect analysis, or other type of what if exercise that is run through to identify those sleeping giants that may be out there, and hopefully they're not. But that's where I'm headed. That's why my questions are pointed in that direction.
Okay.
I just want to interject here real quick. So, Jim, I'm going to give you one more stab at it if you have anything else responsive to the question. But it sounds like we need to get maybe potentially a little bit more clarity or specificity to respond to this. So I think we need to follow up on this matter. So unless, Jim, you had anything else that you wanted to add right now, I think that we probably should set this aside for a little bit.
Right. I could suggest maybe David Davies could connect with the questioner, and we could take it from there, and we'll provide you with a response. I think that's a good path, Lauren.
All right,
thank you. I would appreciate that.
All right, thanks very much. So the folks who are on the phone, I want to see if there are some questions. So is there anyone on the phone who has a question? And as those folks are getting up the courage, if you are in the room and you want to use the raise hand function, you can use that to also let me know that you have a question. So go ahead and raise your hand. Go ahead.
I'm on the phone. I don't know if you can hear me. Maybe I missed something. I apologize. I'm juggling a few things. I'm one of the residents along the corridor, and I don't know about all the codes and all the fancy terms and stuff like that, but I have a different safety question in regards to the finished configuration of the light rail and the freight rail. I'm just curious as to why in some parts of the corridor, there's like a safety wall in between that's slated to be built in between freight rail and the electric light rail. Because I mean, there's been a lot of talk at this meeting about these are what we do if there's a disaster. What we do if there's a disaster. If there's a disaster in our neighborhood, it sets to blow the neighborhood apart. So I prefer to avoid that at all costs. So I'm curious as to why in certain parts of the corridor where light rail and freight rail are running in close proximity, why some parts it was decided we will build a protective barrier, and in other parts they're like, it should be fine. So right. I'm curious if somebody can remark to on that, because I'm in a section where they run rather close together. It's a narrow corridor, and there is nothing slated for any sort of protection in between.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Seems like Jim is prepared, which is good, because I was going to put him on the spot. I do want to mention that we did invite BNSF to participate today too, but they were unable to. So, but I think Jim can best answer that. Go ahead, Jim.
All right, thanks, Lauren. So this goes back to our design criteria. As we set out to design this project, we looked at industry standards, and we had a lot of experts looking at this, and we consulted with the railroads as well. And we had specified in the design criteria that we'd have a barrier wall, if you will, also known as a crash wall. Anytime the freight and the LRT are closer than 25 feet to each other. And so that's our criteria that we have moving forward on this project. And there are actually in the Kenwood corridor, as the LRT comes out of the tunnel on both ends, both the portals, we have that condition. So we have crash walls for a short segment on both ends of the tunnel. Now up at the along the BNSF line, which is a class 1, runs quite a bit faster up there. Their speeds are upwards of 40 and 45 mile an hour up through some of those stretches. Is that BNSF, as part of the agreement that we had with them, that we had to make with them in order for us to build this project and ultimately run the LRT, is they required a corridor protection essentially from Bryn Mawr all the way up to the point where we start climbing out of the rail corridor as we get up to Glenwood area. And so that was a BNSF mandated requirement that went beyond our design criteria. And I always kind of look at it, you can maybe appreciate this or not, but I look at it in terms of where Mark is running his line on the Bass Lake Spur, which is just west of the Minneapolis area, and the Kenwood corridor is more like a rural highway versus where Mark actually does run on the BNSF line as well, but that's more of a highway, interstate highway. That's kind of how I equate it myself. But it really comes down to the requirement that BNSF had, that they had dictated that we would have this crash wall going beyond our design criteria that we had in place.
Okay, I guess I'm a little confused. So I live in the Kenwood neighborhood, so very, very close where the 21st Street station will be. That is a really narrow corridor right there. So what I'm understanding is you're telling me that through that corridor, somehow the light rail and the freight rail will be 25 feet away from each other?
That is correct.
Okay, because the way the tracks look, I can't imagine that that's really going to be the case. I mean, they're awful close there.
If it would be helpful, we could have David send you a plan sheet to show you what that looks like.
I mean, that would be great. I just think it's an unfortunate thing that you're running through neighborhoods and they are close. I mean, and I think it's unfortunate that while they're willing to run the wall further up, they're not willing to do it. You know, it's like it takes a break. It comes out of the tunnel, has a little small section, and it's like nothing where you have all these residential areas. And then all of a sudden, you know, from Bryn Mawr on, they're going to do it again. But yes, I mean, that would be great. I just find it very hard to believe that there's going to be that big a gap or big a distance in this narrow little corridor that runs past my house.
Great. Thank you very much for your question. David will follow up with you. David, if you want to take note of the phone number displayed, I don't know if you can see the phone number. And then I don't know if you caught what the first name of the caller was.
I'm familiar with.
Okay, yeah.
I'll follow up.
Great.
He knows who I am. Sounds great.
Yep.
Thank you.
We're good.
Thank you for that question. I'm going to ask my colleague Allison if she can identify the next question from the chat that's about rail safety during construction. And Allison, while you're selecting that, I'm going to ask one more time about phone calls. Is there anyone else that is joining by phone? I could take one more question by phone right now. Okay, and then I see that Representative Hornstein has his hand up, so I will hear from Representative Hornstein, and then we will move to a chat question. Go ahead, Frank.
Thank you, Ms. Olson. Thank you for all of your work putting this meeting together. I just want to make sure if there were residents that had questions, they should certainly go before me. I don't want to. If they're waiting in line, is there anyone else that's has their hand up? I can't tell.
No, I just stuff
Okay.
We'll get to in the chat. So go ahead.
Okay. You may be aware, and this could be directed to Mr. Wagner. It could be directed to Ms. Anthony. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. But there was an update to the SPIL bill, the hazardous materials response legislation that was created in the 1990s at the state level. We updated it in 2014. And that, there's a number of training and other requirements, but I'm interested to know whether as part of this response to a possible freight rail emergency, is it incorporated in your planning the requirements under this law, which says that it states very clearly, I have it here, that the incident commander needs to be contacted by the railroad within an hour of an incident. And then, personnel have to be on site advising within 3 hours. And then there's, other requirements as well. So I'm just wondering, is that portion of state law, expressly incorporated in your planning? And maybe the fire chief too weigh in.
Representative Harnstein, I can answer from the freight railroad side. Absolutely. We took that legislation very seriously. We have a full deck of documentation that is routinely reviewed by our appropriate people. We are currently, MPCA is the entity that governs that document, and we've sent them a revision that they wanted by June 30th of 2021, and I'll be conscious about making sure I get my years right. So it was this last summer, and we are awaiting response from the MPCA to determine whether we have fully addressed what was in that bill. But in the meantime, yes, we've got basically contractors lined up that we call immediately, folks that have the foam suppression, folks that have all of the booms, all that kind of stuff. On call, we pay a retainer, and those people are incorporated as part of those tabletop drills I mentioned earlier that we have performed. So from our vantage point, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't know if anyone wants to add anything, if the fire chief wants to add anything. I do know there's coordination, of course, between these entities, like I said, through these
Absolutely, there
exercises?
is. Yep, absolutely, there is. As I said, we do exercises together every year. From my standpoint, the incident commander is always on scene because the way that we operate is that the first rig on scene is the incident commander until they're relieved and someone else takes command until a chief or someone else above him arrives and takes command. So in that way, we are always informed and, we're always informing each other on the radio. So yeah, again, we exercise together. We're aware of the resources that the railroad has, and they're aware of the resources that we have, and so we're able to work really efficiently together.
Thank you so much, Chief Tyner, and I think it's important clarification here because I remember in our very first meeting we had a couple years ago, pre-COVID, it was at Jones Harrison, and there seemed to be a little confusion at that meeting as to who would be in charge. So just for clarity, it is the Minneapolis Fire Department would be in charge of any emergency situation along this corridor. Is that correct?
That is correct. I mean, obviously, it depends on the emergency and where we're at in the emergency. When you're talking about a rail derailment or something like that, or if there's a fire, yes, we're going to be in charge until the emergency is mitigated, and then possibly an investigative agency may take over and be in charge. But for the emergency part of the incident, we would be in charge.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much for those questions, Representative Hornstein. Just a reminder, I guess we did get a little feedback about just make sure to mute if you're not speaking. I'm not hearing too much background, but I guess there's a little bit. So just be mindful of that, please. I'm going to ask my colleague Allison to identify either the person who has a question or the question, and we could see if that individual would like to articulate their question. What would be the next question from the chat?
Yes, so I believe Mark asked his question. So on to the next question was from Mary around project having experienced 5.2 incidents per 20,000 hours of logged work. I will actually just defer to Mary if you want to speak to that or elaborate on the question.
Yeah, so we'll invite Mary to speak to this if she would like to. I also think I recognize this question as one that maybe was provided in advance. And so I want to remind folks that there's some materials posted on the project page that includes answers to some of those questions. I think this is one of those. So,
say, Lauren,
yeah.
Actually, this one came a little bit later, so we did not get a written response before the meeting, but we will provide one afterward. But I could go ahead and address it if you want to now.
Yeah, so
well, I'd like to ask the question.
Yeah, go ahead, and for everyone's benefit, go ahead.
This is Mary Paddock. We know that as of last December, the project had experienced 2.5 incidents per 20,000 hours of logged work. And this was more than the industry average of 3.4. So it's 5.2 versus 3.4. In the last year, has the project's safety incident score improved? And if it did, how did you achieve that improvement? And if it didn't, what are your plans to lower it? And the other part of my question is, are there other accidents that took place that are not included in that rate? For example, last year, the 2 flagger failure incidents and the collapse of the crane were not counted in that incident score. Generically, they are not susceptible to being counted.
Sure. Well, I'd like to clarify, Mary, that so going back to 2020, the rail safety meeting we had last year, as of September of 2020, I reported an index number of 4.6, and that compared to that the index standard for general construction. I want to emphasize that general construction was 3.2, so it is higher than the general construction average indicator. We had an update to that earlier this year at the SIDNA meeting, where I reported as of September 2021, a 4.4. My folks just did another calculation based on your question, and we are currently at 4.0. So things are improving. I'd like to have maybe Dale even talk to what things he has done to address your question about what we've done. But I would say that in terms of the crane and the flagger incidents, those are really kind of one-offs. We have not had issues like that since we've been working on the project, and thankfully and hopefully we will not have anything like that ever happen again. And I think Dale can talk to that about the steps he is taking with his crews to really try to emphasize safety on the project. So Dale, maybe you could elaborate on what you're doing these days and how you've brought that number down.
Yeah, Jim. Really what we did towards the end of last year, we started asking more of our management and our supervisory people in the field of pre-planning the work, and then the engagement with management and the field crews in planning the work from a safety standpoint and from a productivity standpoint, and all the interchange or interfaces we have with the other entities like the railroad. And so really what it was is we started.
Uh-oh, Dale. Dale, right now we can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that.
We missed most of what you said, so.
All right.
Go ahead.
And so really what it was is increased focus on safety, as Jim said, but then where the rubber met the road was requiring more of our project management and field engineers being involved on a daily basis as we're starting up the work and closing down the work every day. And that's how I think we're seeing our improvements.
And it's still above the national average, though, for that kind of project. What's going to bring it down?
Well, you got to consider that since it was already above the average last year, as Jim suggested, we're moving that number down. You know, it's like any average, you've got a number behind you. You got to keep, that's going to keep, if you look at the project as a whole.
Right.
It's going to take a while to bring that number down from where it was, but it's trending down, which is good.
And could you just, for those of us who are lay people, in terms of engineering, the things that you said, the pre-planning, and the interface, and the focus on safety, and so forth, what does that mean? Can you give an example? You know, like,
the example would be the project managers and the field engineers are starting their day with the crews when they're starting their work, so the foreman or the superintendents, and they're discussing the work plan, they're discussing the hazards for that day and for the specific work that we're trying to accomplish that day, and they're talking about the ways to mitigate the risks that go along with that. And the focus on that, I think, is really what's driving the improvement in our safety.
All right, thank you very much, Mary, for your question, and thank you, Dale, for that information. Eric Larson has been very patiently waiting. So Eric, go ahead, please.
Yeah, here I am. Thanks for taking my question. I had a question for the chief. He was giving the general kinds of decisions he might have to make for different kinds of products. But I was wondering if the product turned out to be ethanol and it was an ethanol fire, what would the normal response you'd expect you'd be making to that if there was, say, a single car on fire? Do you have that necessary fire suppressant on hand to use? Would you most likely be evacuating the neighboring houses? How large a radius would you evacuate, and how soon would you begin pumping water out of the lake once it was mixed with ethanol?
Okay, well, thank you for your question. To answer your first question as to how we would normally respond, we would normally start with a full fire response, which includes 3 fire engines, 2 fire trucks, 1 heavy rescue rig, 2 battalion chiefs, along with support vehicles, the mobile fire command, and salvage. But because this is an ethanol spill, we would also add the hazardous materials team, which would include Engine 11, Ladder 9, and also Battalion Chief 5. From there, we would upgrade the response based upon the needs of the incident. Ethanol is a flammable liquid. As far as hazardous materials goes, actually, flammable liquids are one of the easier ones for us to deal with. And so, ethanol can be put out with water, it can be put out with firefighting foam, can be put out with dry chemical extinguishers. And we have plenty of all three of those. So we would definitely have the resources on hand to put out a fire in a rail car. And the railroad also can come behind with, they probably have 50 times more foam than we have. Would we usually evacuate the neighboring houses? Definitely the ones in the very near vicinity. For ethanol, there's a minimum evacuation zone of 150 feet. That's for a small fire, ethanol fire. A large spill is 1,000 feet, but when we're talking about a tanker car, we're going to isolate for half a mile and probably evacuate for half a mile. Will you usually, how large a radius? Oh, I think I just answered that one. How soon do you begin vacuuming out the lake? Well, we have booms that we can place in the lake to keep ethanol and other flammable liquids from spreading, ones that are lighter than water, but we don't actually vacuum it out. So we have to call in a hazmat mitigation company, contractor, or cleanup contractor to come and actually get that out. Really, our focus is really on life safety, and then property, and then the environment. So we can stop it from spreading, but the actual cleanup has to be done by a hazardous materials contractor.
All right, thank you for that question and answer. The time is.
Do you have a follow-up? I see your hand up though.
Oh, from Eric.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, we have been certainly allowing brief follow-ups if you had a follow-up, Eric.
Yeah, I thought when I was looking into this 10 years ago that the ethanol would mix with the water. It wouldn't float on the water, so that would make it not advisable to use water to put the fire out. And you wouldn't be able to rely on booms on the lake either to contain the ethanol because it would mix.
Well, actually, if it's mixing with the water, and I think you might be right on that, then yeah, the booms wouldn't be effective. We wouldn't even need them. But we can still put them out. We still can put the fire out with water because the water is actually cooling, the fire. There's three ways to put out a fire. You can cool it, you can smother it, or you can remove the fuel. So we can still cool it with the water, and so that would be effective as far as putting out the fire.
Right. So you'd probably rely then on the foam, which you have some of in your hazardous materials store, and then rely on the railroad to bring up the rest?
Well, we carry foam on every fire engine that we have. So every fire engine we have carries foam. So we have that capability no matter who's there.
And then, sorry for my last question, is then how long do you think that whole episode would be once it had gotten into the lake water and people had been evacuated? How long would it be before things kind of come back to normal life for those residents?
It's hard for me to say. It's going to be definitely hours before, that mitigation crew gets there. How long it takes for them to actually mitigate it kind of depends on, the amount of the spill and what they have to do to get it out of there. So, I don't have a better answer for you than that.
Thanks, Chief.
All right, thank you very much. The time is slipping away, so I want to note too that, again, questions that don't get answered today, we can pass them on to folks, and I think the questions that we're able to answer could probably post on the public involvement page also, where that some of that information is already there. We'll move on with the questions that we can get to. I do think that allowing a little bit of back and forth is good, but I definitely want to limit it, and please try to be concise with our remaining time. So Allison, what was the next question that is good for our, well, we have our experts in the room on rail safety during construction?
Yeah, so I am going in the order of the chat, just want to clarify. So the third question I have is from Mark Nichols. Have there been any fatal or permanent injuries connected with the project to date, either in construction, employees, or the public?
Lauren, maybe I'll take that one.
Yes, please. Thanks, Jim.
So again, we track that very carefully with our safety crew in coordination with Dale's construction management staff, and there have been no fatal injuries related to construction on the project. There have been, I think there were a couple of instances where a severed fingertip occurred in a couple of occasions, handling some type of power tools. I don't have the details on that on hand right now, but though that's probably the extent of it.
How about to people that are not construction or railroad? In other words, the public, any significant injuries connected with the project to the public?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Lauren, you're muted.
If I didn't do that once, I mean, this wouldn't be a meeting. Eric, are you raising your hand because you would like to ask another question, or are you just still raised? I will say that I'm going to someone else next, but are you raising your hand to ask another question? No.
Yeah,
okay.
sorry, you have to manually unraise your hand. I didn't realize.
Yes, that's right. So I'm going to turn again to the comment section. And again, if anybody else in the room has a question, raise your hand. I'll move to the phone after this one. But Allison, can you help us identify the next question from the chat, please?
Certainly. I'm going to combine the next two as they are related. And I'm going to do my best. So the question is around local residents near the rail line being informed ahead of time about where they should go in case there is a tank car fire or risk of explosion. And then talking about the Axon Green buildings, which are wood-framed multifamily housing right by the tracks. And then a second question, kind of right after this in the chat, is around the percentage of community residents that have connection to sources of immediate information around evacuation and shelter in place for this specific project. So,
right, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Chief Tyner, this sounds like a question for you, and if you agree and if you understand the question, let us know what you think.
I think I understood the last half about the percentage of people that have access to the communication. Is that what we're talking about, or are we talking about another part of the question? Well, I'll answer that one first, and then I'll have you ask me the other part again. So basically, because we're using every mode of communication, if you have a smartphone, if you have a tablet, if you have a television, if you have a radio, if you're at home, we're going to make sure that you get the information through, one of those sources. So it'll be pushed out to your smartphones and tablets. It'll be broadcast on television, on the radio, and we'll be going door to door to inform residents who may be in their homes. So while I can't give you a percentage, certainly we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that you get the information that you need. What was the other part of your question, please?
Yeah, that was my question. Basically, what if something happens that's instantly catastrophic, like an explosion or a fire, and people need to get out right away? And a related question is, I don't think you want people. You don't want to encourage people to have their own evacuation plans ahead of time, because that means people are going to carry stuff to their cars and get on the streets and really mess stuff up. So, so it's a two-part question. If people need to leave immediately, shouldn't there be a designated safe refuge? I understand that if it's a leak of a toxic gas in the air, sheltering in place, but if it's a fire explosion, shouldn't there be a safe refuge designated for certain areas of the city, for certain neighborhoods that are right near the rail line, and there just isn't time to go door to door and inform people. Thank you.
So
much.
I would answer that. First of all, if it's a instantly catastrophic thing, you're probably going to know you need to evacuate before we ever even get there. I can say that, you know, again, we can't just set up, you know, evacuation places because it is dependent upon, you know, what the hazard is. If we know it's, for instance, if we know it's ethanol, then we know you got to get at least a half a mile away in any direction, you know. So, but without knowing what the product is, we can't set a set place.
All right.
For an evacuation.
Yep. Thank you, Chief. I'm going to turn to the phone one more time here and see if there was anybody on the phone who had a question. All right, not hearing any. So we will go back then to questions that were in the chat. Allison, have you identified another question for our limited time here?
Yes. So this one is from Mary Paddock. About the daily track monitoring, what are the track conditions that arise that result in stopping work? How often do they occur? How much and how often do tracks shift?
All right, I'll take an attempt at this. I'm not going to have all those numbers at my fingertips, so I'll just say, Mary, we'll follow up with you on the details. There is a certain tolerance that is allowed for movement of the tracks before we have to take some action, like stop the trains. And so we'll have to follow up with you on that, on what that number is. In terms of the number of occurrences, I don't have that either, but it is related. You know, some of it was related to settlement we observed as we were installing the sheet piles for that supportive excavation for the tunnel. And I think the most recent one, which was it's in the Q&A, talking about an event September 29th, where we had observed some settlement in the Cedar Lake Parkway when we had that road closed when we were doing some work. And so at that time, we had to go through that protocol. We talked about that line of communication where we had to stop train traffic, figure out what was going on, and come up with a remedy before trains could come through. And again, we used that process was shown on that PowerPoint slide with the lines of communication. So I'm not necessarily going to have the number of incidents that has occurred. We've added, you know, there's been probably a handful of times where that it has occurred, and but we do the same protocol where we notice the settlement, because we inspect the tracks before a train comes through to make sure things are in good condition, and so that's how that's picked up, or by some monitoring that's already in place. So I'm not sure if I answered all of the questions that were posed, but that's generally how we approach issues on the track. And again, we can follow up with a written response on that.
So like in general, is it like a daily occurrence or weekly, or has it happened 3 times ever, or what?
Mary, I can just say it's not a daily, sorry. Well, maybe I could say, then Mark could add, I don't think it's necessarily a daily occurrence. I just don't have the frequency. Mark, maybe you have more of that detail with you.
Well, I don't have exact detail, but I can tell you it's very few. I can tell you that the tolerance condition on September 30th was 1.5 inches. So we're not talking about, but that was significant enough for us and the standards to stop freight rail until that got leveled out. But that's how narrow these standards are. And I would say, Jim said a handful. I would say, yeah, a handful is accurate as far as any unplanned stoppage of trains due to these kinds of conditions. And, you know, believe me, we would be the first ones to be waving our arms and screaming if it was more than that.
Thank you.
I would concur with that, Mark. We want to make sure you can run your trains through.
Something else I noticed in the chat that I want to bring to everyone's attention is Chair Cedarberg from Sidna asked a question about a handout or checklist that could be used for an evacuation plan. And Angela Anthony from our emergency preparedness office posted a resource that some of you may be familiar with at ready.gov. And you will find a whole variety of resources there, including what to have on hand so you can respond to an emergency and how to make your plan with your family. So I want to just point that out in the chat. All right, so I'm not seeing other hands raised, so we will go back to questions in the chat, and then Mark, you will be next. So Allison, what's the next question from the chat?
The next is also from Chair Cedarberg. The new freight line positioning along Burnham and Cedar Lake Parkway means houses in the corridor shake every time a freight train passes. What impact will these train vibrations have on the construction of the tunnel this winter? We've been told there will be cement poured all winter. What happens if the cement doesn't cure correctly or doesn't set correctly given cold weather and ongoing vibrations from freight?
Sure, I'll cover this one, Lauren. So there is really no impact from the trains operating past the construction zone in terms of the concrete curing. The concrete will cure on its own. It doesn't, the vibrations that are caused by the train or even the construction traffic that go on, and that's kind of a standard thing when you're working on a construction site, you have heavy equipment running back and forth, that does not have an impact, whether it's either cold weather or warm weather.
I'm just going to give, see if Chair Cedarberg wants to follow up, just because we've been basically allowing that. So you have any follow-up at this time? Laura?
I don't want to armchair quarterback engineer it. You guys are the experts, but that seems implausible to me, just given the amount of vibration that happens close to the light rail, and knowing that some of the cement pouring that happened on the Green Line through University Ave had to be redone just because it was poured during the winter. I'm pleasantly surprised with your answer, so thank you.
Well, maybe if I could, I don't know what you're referring to in terms of what was poured during the wintertime, but if the concrete got too cold and it wasn't kept heated, that's its own problem. That's not even related to any vibration. That's the concrete needs to be a certain temperature to adequately cure, and that is something that we watch out for. And as you'll notice, along the whole line, we're going to start slowing down in construction, not necessarily the tunnel, but elsewhere, because of just the cost to heat the concrete to keep it a certain temperature before it adequately cures and gains strength. That's an issue that is out there that we have to watch out for.
Thank you.
Thank you both. So I'm going to ask Mark if he has a question, and then I see Chief Tyner would like to address another question, so we'll go to that next. And then unfortunately, there might be a few that we're unable to get to tonight, so I'm sorry, but Chair Brown from the Kenwood Neighborhood Association, you have a question?
Sure, are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, first to the presenters, thank you for being here tonight and for all the work you do to keep us all safe. I had a question. I'm one of those houses that shake. We moved here 6 years ago, actually more in that, yes, in our backyard, crowd, knowing this project was happening. And so we've had about 2,000 days of the trains going by. We actually don't mind them too much. But on the question of the speed of the freight trains, Mark, I know you mentioned the 10-mile-per-hour limit. My understanding is that is kind of a voluntary limit that, the trains, I'm sure, or the tracks, I'm sure, designed to handle speeds much higher than that. And my experience is some trains go through the corridor faster than others. And so my questions to you would be, one, what is kind of the limit at which the train would become unsafe going through the corridor? And then two, how do you know if a train is exceeding the speed limit, the 10-mile-per-hour limit?
I think the track itself, we could probably buzz through there at 50 miles an hour to be safe, because the rail is so heavy and the curves are elongated enough. And I'm not being facetious. I'm just saying it's very uber redundant as far as safe at 10 mile an hour. But I mean, yeah, I could see it easily. I think the class standard would be 40 miles an hour. But even then, we run it at 10 and let's leave it at that. Now, as to your question as how do we know that? Well, every locomotive has an event recorder in it. And so when we do get calls, and we have gotten calls from citizens saying, hey, your train was going faster than 10 miles an hour. We know exactly when they called, we know exactly what train it is, and when that locomotive gets back to Glencoe, where we're headquartered, that event reporter gets downloaded and it's all recorded and we can tell right away. One of our internal tests that we do in addition to the FRA inspecting us is we have what's called operations tests. We have 2 designated supervisor locomotive engineers, and one of their functions in testing whether the crews are operating safely is we have a radar gun. And so they will randomly radar gun them going through there as well. And so, and the other thing we do is we have a culture where people are constantly encouraging other people to be safe. So if we did have a rogue engineer out there, we would know about it and we would nail them. So everybody is uber sensitive that run the trains. You don't go faster than 10 miles an hour through the corridor. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right, thank you, Mark. Chief Tyner, I know that you were wondering if a certain question got answered. It's a bit hard for me to keep up with all the questions, so I don't know if you're able to articulate the question you're answering and then answer it.
Yeah, so I think I answered the first part of the question. I don't think I answered this part of the question, and this part of the question, as I'm trying to find it again, was what arrangements are in place to address the needs of disabled individuals? Now, when we say disabled individuals, I'm assuming that we're talking about mobility impaired individuals. And in that case, if we're talking about a rescue, it's actually pretty much the same. We basically do, people mostly rescue themselves. After that, we pretty much, use ladders to rescue people off of higher heights that are able, and everyone else, for one reason or another, is disabled, whether it's because they're physically disabled or because they're just unconscious or whatever it is. So in that instance, that is what we do. There's really no difference for that. If we're talking about evacuation, though, which we probably are talking about, we do have also agreements with Metro Transit. And so we're able to use Metro Transit buses to assist us with either evacuation or just sheltering people if the weather's bad or things like that. So in this case, we could use Metro Transit buses, which have mobility impaired capabilities to help with the evacuation.
All right, thank you, Chief. All right, I think we're gonna have time for one more question. I also want to mention, I think a lot of you on this call know David Davies, and I don't know if I'm going to get his title right, but he's essentially a liaison from the Met Council to the community. I'm sure a lot of you interact with him, and that's another place where you can direct questions that you have, not to put him too much on the spot, but I think he's used to that. Maybe he's willing to share some form of contact information for those of you who may not know him. So just want to provide that to you because we can't get to every question. I believe that Representative Hornstein had a question, and his will be the final question.
Thank you. This very much relates to Mary's question earlier. I just wanted to know, we know the climate's changing. We've seen a lot of more extreme weather events, particularly, training thunderstorms with a lot of flooding. Are more common. So I'm just wondering if there is a plan in place to reroute trains during extreme weather events or severe flooding. And sometimes these summer floods come on very quickly. And, the worst case scenario that I worry about is, a train coming, the track washing out or otherwise impacted by water. So is there any particular specific planning being done around that?
So I think that's mine to answer. And the answer to that question is yes. We have a detour agreement with the BN, now the BNSF, that goes back to 1993, which we would have to run out to Appleton, up to Wilmer, and then head east on their Wilmer line. We've never used it in the 30 years that we've been in business, but I will tell you that we have had severe flooding events, particularly on the Minnesota Valley line. And what we do there is when you have like a 9-inch rain in 1 hour, we send out the track inspector vehicle well ahead of any train. because we absolutely don't want a train to find a washed out track. So we have high rail vehicles that will inspect after a heavy rain. And as you said, this has occurred more often, I want to say, in the last 10 years than it did in the first 20. So, but that's what we would do.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
So Lauren, maybe I could add to that. In the Kenilworth corridor, we've actually made some improvements for drainage at 21st and at Westlake, where there was really poor drainage before we did some improvements there. And so that only helps the matter in terms of heavy rainfall.
All right. Well, I think this has been a really great discussion. And I want to thank all of you for being here from the community and those who came to share your expertise with us. We really appreciate it. Again, if you're looking for more information, you can check the project page. There's some information already there for you about some questions that came up in advance, and there's likely to be new information added in the future responsive to a couple additional questions. So again, thank you all very much and have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lauren and Chief and the project people and the legislature.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.